Today we're going to look at the history of the Walt Disney World spin-off to one of the longest running shows in Disney Parks history, Fantasmic. What do we know about the East Coast version of Fantasmic? Well, hello there! My name's Jeremy and welcome back to Freeform Disney, where I talk about all aspects of Disney, from the animated movies to the theme parks to Star Wars, Marvel, and Pixar, and the TV shows, and everything else in between. And that is why it's Freeform. And keep coming back every day for new daily content. If you're not subscribed yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Today it's time for the long requested follow-up to my old Disneyland history video on Fantasmic. It's time to head to the other coast in the United States and look at some Walt Disney World history of the amazing show, Fantasmic. What is Fantasmic? If you don't know what Fantasmic is, it's an amazing show that combines all of the amazing show elements Disney has into one big, gigantic show. There are character actors, both in full costume and ones that you see the faces of. There are water fountains and mist screens which display video on them. There are fireworks, there's an immersive story, there's music, and there is a celebration of Disney all throughout it. It's a show like no other in Disney, and for my money, one of Disney's absolute best. How did Fantasmic start? Well, originally Fantasmic started over at Disneyland in 1992 and didn't come over to Walt Disney World until 1998, 6 years later. If you're curious about the origin of the original show, I'll have a link down in the description, and also up in the upper right corner you can click up there, and there you can go head on over to my other video, and there you can see all about the original history of Fantasmic, as well as the updates that have happened over at Disneyland since, and it certainly has seen its fair share of updates. Now, looking into Walt Disney World and Fantasmic is harder than you'd think. There's not as much concrete information on Fantasmic's origin over there, but it does appear that we almost had one or two very different shows instead. It appears that we were very close to having a Noah's Ark show. Originally started by then CEO of Disney, Michael Eisner, he was looking to add a water show on Crescent Lake. That's the lake between Epcot and Hollywood Studios, which then was Disney MGM Studios. Now, Seven Seas Lagoon already had the electrical water pageant, and Michael Eisner wanted to add a water show for the hotel guests at the Dolphin and Swan Resorts and the Yacht and Beach Club. Andrew Lloyd Webber was brought in and he wrote the score for the show. Storyboards were even made. Now, here's where things get a little bit murkier. There are some reports that there was interest in making the show even bigger and taking it over to Disney MGM Studios and building an entire amphitheater for it, like we've seen for Fantasmic. Now, some say the show fell out of favor for a different show called EQ, short for equestrian, and it was going to be about horses and have live animals in the show. Back over on the West Coast in 1992, Fantasmic had opened, and over in Florida, they were busy debating what the East Coast response to Fantasmic would be. Eventually, those other two ideas, Noah's Ark and the EQ show, they fell through, they didn't end up happening. And they decided the best East Coast answer to Fantasmic would be Fantasmic itself. Barnett Ritchie, the Disney legend who created the original Fantasmic, was put in charge of the East Coast version as well. Rich Taylor, the vice president of entertainment over at Walt Disney World, was also quite involved in getting that show up and running. Now, unlike Disneyland, Disney World's Fantasmic would not be at the Rivers of America. Instead of Magic Kingdom, it would go to the smaller Disney MGM Studios park, which was currently going through its first major expansion. Starting in 1994, that first major expansion for Disney MGM Studios was Sunset Boulevard, and it started opening there with the Tower of Terror as its first big attraction. Later, Fantasmic would open in 1998, and Rock and Roller Coaster would open in 1999. Now, unlike Disneyland's Fantasmic, which had to be made to work in an already existing location over at the Rivers of America and on Tom Sawyer Island, Disney World's Fantasmic would have its own amphitheater built specifically for it. This meant there would be tons of seating and the capability to handle giant crowds of people wanting to see Fantasmic. They built the Hollywood Hills Amphitheater. It was inspired by the Hollywood Bowl back over in Los Angeles. It had its own special entrance, its opening area and standing areas in there as well as seating for 6,900 people. And hey, if you did have to stand, there was room for at least 3,000 people to stand and watch the show. And if that wasn't enough, hey, you got some concession stands right there that they built into the whole place. Nice. Now, as you're in the amphitheater, you look on down and you see a giant stage surrounded by this big moat. That moat actually goes all the way around the island and holds 1.9 million gallons of water. It gets as deep as 6 feet in some spots, but quite a bit of it is no deeper than a foot, which is great for all of the actors and makes things safer. That's one of the things they were able to do because they built it for it rather than reusing the rivers of America. Most of Disney World's waterways are actually connected to the larger Florida waterways in the area, which means that both wildlife and other environmental concerns became a major factor in what could be done on those waterways. But the one built for Fantasmic overcomes those problems by being built just for it and not being directly connected to the natural waterways in and around the park. I mean, it's great. That's why they can do all the cool pyrotechnics on it. It works very, very nicely. Now, how about that stage? It's got this giant imposing mountain, 59 feet tall. Now that they were getting to do an East Coast Fantasmic, they made things big. And that mountain, it also hides all the backstage areas back behind. There's even stuff down below ground, too. Because they built it for Fantasmic, the backstage areas work a lot better there than they do back over in Disneyland. Now, we talked about making everything bigger. Well, guess what? Not only the stage, the amphitheater, even the show is bigger. It's actually longer by a few minutes. But that's not the only difference. Fantasmic at Disneyland remained a very similar show from when it opened in 1992, and for more than a couple decades before it underwent a major revision. That means Disney World, opening in 1998, was a direct offshoot of that original Disneyland Fantasmic. And it made its own changes. Now, as the show follows that same format as the original Disneyland Fantasmic, I'm going to highlight the differences between those two, not to the new 2.0 version of Fantasmic over in Disneyland. First, a few notes. There were a bunch of movies that came out in the 90s, and the new Fantasmic was going to take full advantage of that. 1992 saw Aladdin come out, and then Lion King and Pocahontas came out in the few years after that. And they were huge and made big impacts on what this show over in Disney World would look like. Disney World's Fantasmic opens in much the same way as Disneyland's, with the Mickey and the Sorcerer Mickey sections giving way to a flower scene. All of that's pretty much the same. But then start coming some of the big shifts. So instead of doing this Jungle Book section, Disney World opted for a slightly shorter Lion King section. Next, Disney World went with a big section with bubbles. The bubbles showed scenes from over a dozen different Disney movies, including the relatively new Hercules and Mulan. And it was figured that it might be updatable for new Disney movies when they came out. This meant that there was also no pink elephants on parade and no Pinocchio marionettes. Those were gone. Forward to the time the cannon goes off, but this time over in Disney World we don't get a pirate ship. But instead, the island comes to life with the story of Pocahontas. With stunts, music, acting, and more. It is a 3.5 minute long section, and it is a giant beast compared to everything else in the show. The Pirates section back over in Disneyland was actually only 2.5 minutes long, so it really was big at 3.5. And then we get on to another classic part of Fantasmic. The princess barges come in, and we have the same 3 sets of princesses, Ariel, Belle, and Snow White with their princes. But Disney World also found a way to get us a little bit more by adding the mist screens in there with Cinderella and Jasmine and their princes. And then we move on to the Evil Queen. And this is one of the big changes that everyone sees over in Disney World. Instead of the Evil Queen just calling on Ursula and Chernabog, and then later having Maleficent show up, this time it is jam-packed with villains. And we get short versions of Ursula, Cruella, Scar, and Frollo popping up. And then we bring in Jafar, and we pause here for a moment because Jafar shows us all how snake-like he can be. Instead of Kaa the Snake in Disneyland earlier in the show, at Disney World we get Jafar here at the villain section popping in as a snake. And then we're back to the villains on the mist screens, and it's Hades and ever-popular Chernabog for his full scene. And then back to Maleficent and her transformation, just like in the Disneyland version. But there are some changes there too, because Mickey picks up his magical sword and vanquishes her, but this time a giant wall of water geysers rises up in between them. And that's new because in Disneyland, Mickey is right up next to Maleficent. And there just isn't a spot for Mickey to walk out essentially onto the rivers of America to go be separate like that. Now, I have seen many complaints about Maleficent at Disney World, as Maleficent's just wings and a head on a cherry picker over there. But one has to note, this is actually how Maleficent was at Disneyland in the 90s as well. So Disney really just copied that over and made her 40 feet tall. The big thing is that Disney World has never updated to a full animatronic dragon the way that Disneyland did. Hopefully someday they will. What else? Oh yeah, the ending. The ending is the same, except that there is no giant Mark Twain riverboat, and instead the boat is meant to be a smaller ship from the original Mickey cartoon of Steamboat Willie. Some imagination, huh? And one other thing that should be noted is that on top of this main show, there's also a second, much smaller version of Fantasmic that plays at Disney World when there are thunderstorms happening. Now, there are no actors in this one, and it's only 4 minutes long. It's called A Taste of Fantasmic, but it still has mist screens, fountains, and some fireworks. And actually uses a song that's not used in the main show, Little April Showers from Bambi. That's pretty cool too right there. Now, what has changed over the years since Fantasmic opened in 1998 over in Disney World? The surprising answer is not a whole lot. There have been minor tech updates from time to time, to be sure. There have been changes to the number of showings that have been happening for the show, as it's generally gone up as the parks have gotten busier and busier. They've also worked on adding more seating on occasion, with 2012 being the biggest occasion for adding more seating and converting some of that previous standing room. In 2013, to coincide with the 15th anniversary of Fantasmic at Hollywood Studios, a new glow with the show was added so that you could have Mickey ears all throughout the audience that added to the immersiveness of the show. And they look really cool, by the way. I would love to be there for a Fantasmic show that had all of those ears throughout the audience. I mean, that would be fun. Sadly, I wasn't there in 2013 or any other occasion for that to have happened. Not yet. Someday again. Maybe there'll be some good Mickey ears at the time. Now we move forward a couple more years, and in 2015, a few things did happen for Fantasmic. Fantasmic got its first sponsor ever, Pop Secret. There was also an update to the bubbles, and they added a few new bubbles, finally. And this was for Tangled, The Princess and the Frog, and Frozen. They each got their new bubbles in there. Now, the funny thing here is I find this update to be surprising in that it took this long to finally have this kind of update. It took 17 years before they added in these new bubbles. Now, the bubbles were there and they had this great potential to be updated, but with all of the movies in between, it never happened. Huh. Well, maybe that'll change a little more here in the future at some point. Certainly not prior to here in 2020, but maybe at some other point. Now, what else has changed? There's one other thing that I do know that's changed, and that's somewhere between 2015 and 2016, as it was after the bubble update, but before mid-2016, Maleficent's wings actually changed a little bit. Before, there were just single streaks of lightning that would seemingly randomly appear on her wings, very much like the original Disneyland version. But now, with the update, they are hugely colorful, pink and purple, and they were lit up across the span of her wings. So that was a really neat update right there. Maleficent looks much more impressive that way, I think. And, well, that's really about it for the major changes over at Fantasmic. Now that leaves you probably asking, when will Disney World's Fantasmic get a major overhaul or significant update? Well, this is a question that people have been asking for years and years, myself as well. And there always seem to be rumors that it will be getting that big hoped-for update. But up to this point, it still hasn't come. And unlike Disneyland, there's unlikely to be major construction in the park, such as the Galaxy's Edge, which happened over there, that will cause Fantasmic to have to shut down for months. And therefore, it just doesn't get that golden opportunity for an update at Disney World. That means that for now, we'll all have to just keep waiting. Personally, I would love to see the Pocahontas section replaced, say, with Moana, which I think could use the stage and water to great advantage. I would love to also see an updated animatronic Maleficent, projection mapping that really takes advantage of that island, and more. Well, What about you? What do you think of Disney World's Fantasmic? Do you like the changes that they have made? And what changes would you love to see happen? Let me know down below in the comments. And thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a like, share it with anyone you think will too, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done it already. I'll see you back here tomorrow for another new episode of Freeform Disney. Have a magical day, and may the force be with you always.